I saw her. I saw that woman pour poison into my son's fish tank. And then, the very next day, she stood before the entire school, lecturing about environmental protection. The sound of my 8-year-old son, Tyler, his quiet sobs, it still echoes in my head whenever I remember that moment. His goldfish, his first birthday present after his dad and I divorced, floating belly up. Tyler had named every single one. They were his whole world. I'm not usually a suspicious person, but the new security camera I'd installed, after 3 straight months of my shop being vandalized, it caught everything. Margaret Winters, president of the Oak Ridge Development Association. The woman in the Armani suit and pearl necklace, sneaking into my backyard at 3 a.m., dumping cleaning solution into the fish tank, and then walking away with a smirk on her face. That same woman, just 12 hours later, stood on the stage at Middleton Elementary, my son's school, talking about community responsibility and protecting Oak Ridge's environment. She even received the Nature's Guardian Award for donating $50,000 to the Green River Project. Why? I've asked myself that 100 times. Why would this woman, wealthy, powerful, respected, target a small bookstore cafe and a single mom like me? The answer came on a rainy November night in Seattle when the whole town of Oak Ridge saw the truth laid bare. And not just the truth about Margaret Winters, but about how a small town had been ruled by fear and silence for far too long. I'm Sarah Mitchell, owner of Northwest Books and Brews. I never considered myself brave. I'm just someone who loves books, loves coffee, and wanted to create a space for the community. But sometimes, life doesn't give you a choice. Sometimes, you have to stand up, not just for yourself, but for everyone else who's suffering in silence. This is the story of how I faced the monster in the Armani suit, how a town found its voice again, and how the truth, no matter how long it's buried, eventually finds its way to the light. Buckle up, because what I'm about to tell you will make you rethink everything you know about the place you call home. It all started 3 years ago, when I used all my savings and a small inheritance from my late father to buy the old building on Maple Street in downtown Oak Ridge, just a 30-minute drive from Seattle. Oak Ridge was the picture of a perfect small town, tree-lined streets, independent shops instead of big chains, and a sense of community I'd never experienced anywhere else. As a single mom to Tyler, who was just 5 at the time, I wanted a place where my son could grow up safe, where dreams weren't just tolerated, but encouraged. And as a former English teacher, I dreamed of a bookstore combined with a coffee shop, not just a place to sell books, but a gathering space, the cultural heart of the community. The first 6 months were perfect. Northwest Books and Brews quickly became a local favorite. Thursday night readings were always packed. My coffee corner served the best cappuccinos within a 20-mile radius. The free creative writing classes drew people from 16 to 70. I still remember that summer evening, about a year after we opened, when Margaret Winters first walked into my store. Her flawless appearance, perfectly styled platinum hair, a wrinkle-free Armani suit, Christian Louboutin heels, stood out against the cozy, unpretentious vibe of my bookstore. She scanned the shop with a look of critical assessment, then walked straight to where I was standing behind the counter. "Ms. Mitchell, I presume?" she asked, without a greeting or introduction. "Yes. Can I help you?" I replied, with my best small business owner smile. "I'm Margaret Winters, president of the Oak Ridge Development Association." She didn't smile back. "I think we need to talk about the future." I had no idea that simple word, future, held the seeds of an 18-month nightmare, a nightmare that would test not only my resilience, but the very soul of Oak Ridge. Margaret handed me an ivory-colored business card with gold embossing. "Call my office to schedule an appointment. We have a proposal I think you'll find compelling." And then, without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking on the bookstore's old wooden floor. That card is still in my drawer, a reminder of how the simplest beginnings can turn into terrifying storms. 3 days later, I was in Margaret's office, a luxurious building in Oak Ridge's upscale commercial district. Top floor, of course, with glass walls overlooking the entire town. Her office was decorated with expensive mahogany furniture, abstract paintings, and a wall full of photos with celebrities and politicians. It was the kind of place designed to make visitors feel small. "Coffee, Ms. Mitchell?" Margaret offered, but without waiting for my answer, she signaled her secretary outside. "No sugar for me." "Anne." She looked me up and down, perhaps a cappuccino for Ms. Mitchell. "I assume you like sweet things, don't you?" I forced a polite smile, though I actually drink my espresso black, no sugar. A small detail, but it showed Margaret never asked, she decided. "I'm very impressed with what you're doing with your little bookstore," Margaret began, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's quaint, very charming. But I wonder if you've ever thought about the long-term future." "Of course," I replied. "I'm planning to expand the children's section next spring, and maybe." No. Margaret waved her hand dismissively. I'm talking about the real future. Oak Ridge is growing, Sarah. May I call you Sarah? We have major investors looking at your area. People who want to turn Oak Ridge into a destination, not just another small town serving coffee and old books. Margaret slid a folder across the desk to me. Inside were renderings for a luxury shopping and entertainment complex, the Winters Plaza, that would take up the entire block where my bookstore was located. The Winters Group is prepared to buy your building for twice its market value, she said, her smile like a shark's. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Sarah. You could walk away with more money than a former teacher could ever make. I stared at the renderings. In them, my bookstore was gone, replaced by a massive Barnes and Noble and a Starbucks. Everything I had built, the community space, the children's corner with handmade cushions, the cozy reading nooks with string lights, all of it would be flattened. I'm sorry, Mrs. Winters, but I'm not interested in selling, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Northwest Books and Brews isn't just a business to me. It's my dream, it's my son's second home, and it serves this community. Margaret raised an eyebrow. She clearly wasn't used to being told no. I see, she said, closing the folder. That's a pity. But remember, Sarah, Oak Ridge is changing. Progress is inevitable. Those who don't adapt often don't survive. It wasn't a direct threat, but I felt a chill run down my spine as I walked out of that building. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just triggered something irreversible. 2 days later, the health inspector showed up at my shop. They found violations I was certain hadn't existed that morning. Spoiled food in a fridge I checked meticulously every day, a dead mouse in a vent, and a suspiciously damaged water pipe. We received an anonymous complaint, the inspector said, looking apologetic. He looked like he didn't want to be there, but was just doing his job. I have to issue a violation notice and require you to close until the issues are resolved. A week and $7,000 later, I fixed all the problems and reopened. But the damage was done. An article appeared in the Oak Ridge Herald. Local bookstore fails health inspection, rodents and poor hygiene cited. No byline. But the phrasing and the comments about negligence and child safety concerns had a familiar ring to them. That was just the beginning. The following months were like a slow motion. Unstoppable nightmare. My windows were smashed 3 times, the repairs eating up nearly all my financial reserves. The bookstore's social media pages were flooded with negative reviews from what looked like fake accounts. The Oak Ridge Herald ran a series of articles on problem businesses in town. And my bookstore was always mentioned. Then came the fish incident. Tyler had spent weeks cleaning the tank, learning how to care for them, naming each one. The morning he found them floating, my son cried until he threw up. That's why I installed security cameras, front and back. 2 weeks later, I reviewed the footage and saw Margaret Winters, dressed discreetly in black. But unmistakably her, sneaking into my backyard in the early morning hours, pouring something into Tyler's new fish tank, then disappearing into the darkness. I sat in front of my laptop, trembling. A mixture of shock and sick confirmation. A part of me had known it was Margaret, but to actually see it, to see this woman, the wife of one of the wealthiest developers in the region, sneaking into my yard to kill an 8-year-old's goldfish, that changed something in me. I started gathering similar stories from other sources. I began talking to neighbors, to other small business owners, to anyone willing to share. And the stories they told chilled me to the bone. The Ramirez family faced an ICE investigation after Mrs. Ramirez, a cardiologist who'd practiced for 15 years, refused to sell the land behind their house to the Winters Group. David Chin, a local artist whose work hung in Seattle's Pike Place Market, lost a major commission with the Seattle Art Museum after someone vandalized his studio and painted racist symbols on his work. His mother, Mrs. Chin, discovered the community garden she'd tended for 10 years had been sprayed with herbicide overnight. And then, one rainy November evening, I got a call from Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, a retired school librarian, 85 years old. Ms. Mitchell, her voice was frail over the phone. I think we need to talk. About Margaret Winters. And about the letters. I drove to Mrs. Thompson's house in the pouring rain, a charming little cottage full of flowers on the north side of town. She had tea and cookies ready, as if it were a normal social call. But the tremor in her hands as she poured the tea told a different story. I did something terrible, she said, after we were settled with our tea. I signed a letter protesting your bookstore, protesting you, to the city council. Margaret told me you were selling inappropriate books to children, and worse. She paused, swallowing hard. That your store was being used to sell drugs to teenagers after school. I choked on my tea. What? That's a complete fabrication. I know that now, Mrs. Thompson said, her voice full of regret. But Margaret was very convincing. I know her from First Baptist Church. She organizes fundraisers for the school library. I didn't think she'd lie about something like that. Mrs. Thompson pulled an envelope from her cardigan pocket. When I received this thank you letter from the council for my active participation, I knew something was wrong. I never attended any meetings. I just signed a letter Margaret gave me. Inside the envelope was a letter from the Oak Ridge City Council thanking Mrs. Thompson for her eloquent testimony at a recent hearing on controversial businesses in town. You see, Mrs. Thompson said, her voice breaking, I never testified. I never attended any meeting. Someone impersonated me. My heart pounded as the pieces clicked into place. Do you still have a copy of the letter you signed? Mrs. Thompson nodded and produced a crumpled piece of paper. It was a simple letter expressing concern about inappropriate materials in my bookstore. Nothing about testifying or attending meetings. Mrs. Thompson, I said, my voice trembling. I think Margaret used your signature for much more than you agreed to. Not just mine, Mrs. Thompson whispered. She goes to the senior center every week. She got signatures from dozens of people like me. Most of us trusted her. That night, driving home, a new resolve hardened within me. It wasn't just about protecting my business anymore. It was about exposing the truth. About standing up for people like Mrs. Thompson, people who were exploited by someone they trusted. I called Taylor, my 19-year-old daughter, a freshman at the University of Washington. She was a computer whiz, always pushing me to modernize the store with digital tools. Now, I needed her skills for a different purpose. Taylor, I said when she picked up, Mom needs your help. I need you to track everything related to Margaret Winters online, public emails, social media posts, anything you can find. And I hesitated before saying this. I need to know if it's possible to identify who's behind the anonymous websites and social media accounts attacking my bookstore. I'm on it, Taylor replied. Without hesitation. It's time we fought back, isn't it? Yes, I said, a new determination surging. But we're going to do it our way, with truth and evidence, for the next 2 weeks. Taylor and I gathered everything we could. I searched through city council meeting recordings, discovering several other seniors who were quoted as having spoken at meetings they never attended. Taylor traced a series of anonymous blogs and Twitter accounts back to the same IP address, an address registered to the Winters Group. We collected testimonies from people like Sean Patterson. A 22-year-old Margaret had hired to plant the dead mouse in my vent. He confessed out of guilt, providing us with text messages and payment receipts. Other business owners started coming to me. Mason from the bakery, Rachel from the flower shop, Jorge from the craft store. They all had similar stories: intimidation, vandalism, and sudden difficulties with city regulations after refusing to sell their properties to the Winters Group. And then, one cold December evening, Taylor called, her voice electric with excitement. Mom, I got in, she exclaimed. Taylor, I panicked. You can't do that. That's illegal. No, not like that, she quickly explained. One of my classmates works for the school paper. He found out that the Oak Ridge Concerns blog posts were created using a specific email account. And guess what? That account was used to register for a web admin forum where users use their real names. Margaret Winters? I guessed. Not just that, Taylor replied. Mom, I found her emails, all of them. Another friend of mine works in IT at Middleton High, where Margaret runs the parent fund. She used her school email for everything. Everything, Mom. Including corresponding with the person who vandalized Mr. Chen's exhibit, the person who filed the false ICE report on the Ramirez family, and Taylor paused. And I prompted. And the person who poured bleach into Tyler's fish tank, her voice dropped. I felt an icy chill. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about deliberate cruelty to an innocent child. My child. Mom, I think it's time to call the press, Taylor said. Or the police. Not yet, I replied, a plan forming in my mind. First, we need to show everyone the truth. Everyone. All at once. I checked the city calendar. In 1 week. There was a special city council meeting to discuss the future development of Oak Ridge, a meeting I knew Margaret had carefully orchestrated to push her Winters Plaza project. Taylor, how many of your friends can help us put together a presentation for next Thursday? About 20, she said without hesitation. They all hate bullies. Good, I said. Because we're going to put on the biggest show Oak Ridge has ever seen. That Thursday night, it was pouring rain, a typical cold December downpour in Washington. I thought the weather might keep people home, but when I walked into City Hall, my heart leaped in surprise. The room was packed, not just the familiar faces of business owners and neighbors, but also regular customers from the bookstore, parents from Middleton School, and even some reporters from Seattle. Taylor had been working all day with her team, setting up projectors and a sound system. We'd pulled several all-nighters preparing, compiling all the evidence into an undeniable presentation. Margaret sat in the front row. looking smug and serene in an expensive gray suit. Robert Winters, her husband, sat beside her, his arm possessively around her shoulder. They looked like royalty holding court. When I walked in, many eyes turned to me. Some smiled encouragingly. Others looked curious. I felt my knees tremble beneath my skirt, but I walked with my back straight. This wasn't just about me. It was about everyone Margaret had bullied, threatened, and exploited. Mr. William Parker, the city council president, opened the meeting. Welcome to this special meeting on the future development of Oak Ridge. Tonight, we will hear a presentation on the Winters Plaza project, an ambitious urban development initiative for our downtown commercial district. He nodded towards Margaret, who was rising with a confident smile. However, Mr. Parker continued. We have also received requests from several community members who wish to speak on related matters. As per our procedure, we will hear all input before making any decisions. Margaret frowned. Clearly, this wasn't part of her script. First on the list is Ms. Sarah Mitchell, owner of Northwest Books and Brews, Mr. Parker announced. Ms. Mitchell, you have 5 minutes. I stood up, feeling the eyes of the entire room on me. As I walked to the podium, I scanned the room. Tyler sat with my mom in the back row, his face serious. Taylor stood by the projector, giving me an encouraging nod. My neighbors and customers, the people I'd served coffee to and recommended books to for 3 years, were all looking at me with hope. I took a deep breath and began. Hello, my name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm the owner of Northwest Books and Brews, and I'm here tonight not just to talk about my business, but about the soul of Oak Ridge. I glanced at Margaret, who was watching me with cold eyes. For the past 18 months, my business and many others in this town have faced a systematic campaign to vandalize, defame, and ultimately force us out of business. Tonight, I'm going to show you not only how that happened, but who was behind it, and most importantly, why. Taylor clicked the projector. The first image was a map of downtown Oak Ridge, with parcels colored by owner. A large section was colored red, land owned by the Winters Group. This is Oak Ridge now, I said. And this, the slide changed to the rendering of Winters Plaza, is what the Winters Group wants to turn it into. An upscale shopping mall with big chain stores instead of family businesses, luxury condos instead of housing most Oak Ridge residents can afford. Margaret stood up, her face flushed. This is a discussion about economic development, not a forum for personal attacks. I object to this. Mr. Parker banged his gavel. Mrs. Winters, MS. Mitchell has the floor. Please be seated. Margaret sat down, her face contorted with anger. To achieve this goal, I continued. The Winters Group needed every landowner and business in the downtown area to sell to them. Most did, some because they were offered a high price, others. I paused meaningfully, because they felt they had no other choice. Taylor changed the slide. The image from my security camera appeared, Margaret sneaking into my backyard. This is Margaret Winters, I said, my voice trembling with emotion, pouring bleach into my 8-year-old son's fish tank after I refused to sell my bookstore. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Margaret shot to her feet. This is a fabrication. That video is doctored. No, it's not. Taylor's voice came from the control area. She stepped forward, laptop in hand. This video has been authenticated by an independent video analyst. The metadata shows it hasn't been altered in any way. Margaret's jaw dropped. Who do you think you are? Some college freshman with a few computer classes. Actually, Taylor replied, unruffled, I'm a freshman computer science major at the University of Washington, specializing in cybersecurity. And I worked with Professor Williamson, a court-recognized expert in digital authentication. Professor Williamson, a composed man in his 60s, stood up from the third row. I can attest to the authenticity of all video and data presented tonight. Taylor continued clicking through the slides. Videos of Margaret smashing my shop window. Emails from Margaret to the health inspectors, urging them to find violations at my store. A series of texts from Margaret to Sean Patterson, instructing him on how to plant the dead mouse. And then, the most shocking, emails between Margaret and Mayor Barnes, where she threatened to cut off campaign funding if he didn't pressure the inspectors. Mayor Barnes, sitting in the front row, stared at the floor, his face bright red with shame. For 18 months, I continued, my voice stronger as I saw the crowd's reaction. Margaret Winters has waged a systematic campaign to destroy businesses that wouldn't sell to the Winters Group, to slander individuals who dared to speak out, and to deceive this community about her true intentions. Taylor switched to the next slide. Letters sent by elderly residents, with authenticated signatures, but entirely different content than what they thought they were signing. She preyed on the trust of our community's seniors, I said, gesturing towards Mrs. Thompson, who sat trembling in the middle rows, getting their signatures on letters they never read, then replacing the content before sending them. I turned to look directly at Margaret, who was now sitting rigidly, her face pale. And she did all of this not just for profit, but for power. The power to shape Oak Ridge in her own image, regardless of what makes this town special. Enough. Robert Winters leaped to his feet, his face beet red. This is a travesty. A coordinated smear campaign. We'll sue you, Ms. Mitchell. Sue everyone involved in this charade. Mr. Parker banged his gavel. Mr. Winters, I must remind you this is a public meeting. Everyone has the right to speak. Not when they're committing slander. It's not slander when it's the truth. A new voice rang out from the back of the room. I turned to see Mrs. Chin standing, her small frame filled with defiance. Mrs. Winters sabotaged our community garden after I refused to sell my land to her husband's company. I saw her with my own eyes spraying weed killer on our vegetables. And she hired someone to deface my exhibit. David Chin stood beside his mother. I have texts from the person she hired who confessed everything. Then, like a dam breaking, people started standing up all over the room. Mason from the bakery, she spread rumors that my pastries caused food poisoning after I refused an exclusive deal for her project. Mr. Ramirez. She filed a false ICE report against my wife, a cardiologist and legal citizen for 20 years, just because we wouldn't sell our home. Shouts, accusations, and horrifying stories poured from every corner of the room. Margaret and Robert Winters sat frozen, stunned by the rising tide of anger. But then, a soft voice cut through it all. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, 85 years old, leaning on her cane, slowly rose to her feet. The room fell silent as she made her way to a microphone. I've lived in Oak Ridge for 60 years, she said. Her voice frail but clear, trembling but resolute. I taught most of the people in this room how to read. I've watched this town change, grow, sometimes struggle. But I have never seen someone exploit the trust of others the way Margaret Winters exploited mine. She looked directly at Margaret, who now couldn't meet her gaze. You used my trust to attack a young woman who is just trying to build something beautiful. You lied to me. You lied to all of us. And I will never forgive you for that. The room was dead silent as Mrs. Thompson returned to her seat, helped by Sean Patterson, the young man Margaret had hired to vandalize my store, now remorseful and seeking redemption. Mayor Barnes stood up, loosening his tie with a trembling hand. I have something to say, he began, his voice hoarse. I allowed myself to be bought, to be threatened, to be manipulated. The Winters Group contributed over 70% to my re-election campaign, and I looked the other way. I pressured inspectors. I blocked investigations, and I am ashamed. He looked around the room, tears welling in his eyes. I am resigning, effective immediately. Oak Ridge deserves a better mayor than me. A shockwave went through the room, but no one was more surprised than Margaret Winters, who now looked like a cornered animal. You people don't understand, she shrieked, suddenly jumping up. This is about progress, about bringing Oak Ridge into the 21st century, about creating value instead of clinging to some outdated past. No, Margaret, I said, my voice calm but firm. This isn't about progress. This is about greed. About being willing to crush anyone who stands between you and what you want. Robert Winters tugged at his wife's arm, trying to pull her down, but Margaret wrenched free. She lunged towards me, her eyes blazing. You think you've won? You're nothing. Just some failed single mother selling old books. You don't deserve to be in this town. A security officer moved forward as Margaret got within a few feet of me, but I held up a hand to stop him. That's the heart of it, isn't it, Margaret? I said, not flinching. You decide who deserves to live here and who doesn't. You decide what Oak Ridge should be. But Oak Ridge doesn't belong to you. It belongs to all of us. I looked around the room. At the faces of my neighbors and friends, the people I'd served coffee to, recommended books to, and chatted with every day for 3 years. Oak Ridge is this community, the people who live here. Love this place and care enough to stand up for it. I turned back to Margaret, who was now trembling with rage. Tonight, we're not just saying no to the Winters Plaza. We're saying no to the kind of Oak Ridge you want to create, a place only for the rich, where only the voices of the powerful are heard. I lowered my voice, but the room was so quiet everyone could still hear every word. I've given all this evidence to Police Chief Hayes and the King County District Attorney. They're waiting outside. You can go with them voluntarily, or they'll come in here with a warrant. The choice is yours. As if on cue, the back doors of the hall opened, and Chief Hayes walked in with 2 officers. Margaret's face went white as a sheet. This is absurd, Robert Winters yelled. You can't do this. I golf with the governor. I'm afraid we can, Mr. Winters, Chief Hayes said, approaching. We have warrants for both of you on charges including vandalism, extortion, mail fraud, and a host of other felonies. We can do this politely or He placed a hand on the handcuffs at his belt. Margaret looked around the room one last time, at the faces now filled with anger and contempt, the people who once feared her, and then her shoulders slumped in defeat. As the police led the Winterses out, the room remained silent, as if everyone was processing what had just happened. Then, a single clap. Then another. And another. Until the whole room erupted in applause. Not for a victory, but for a release. Mr. Parker, the council president, stood up, his face grim. I think we'll table the discussion on Winters Plaza indefinitely. The days and weeks that followed were a blur. The story of Oak Ridge filled local papers, then spread to national media. CNN did a special report on the small town that stood up to corruption. Twitter exploded with hashtag Oak Ridge Strong and hashtag TruthWins. Margaret and Robert Winters faced 27 different charges, from vandalism and mail fraud to bribery of public officials and racketeering. The expanding investigation uncovered a wider net of corruption involving several city officials. Kevin, the health inspector, had taken bribes. 3 city council members had accepted donations to approve zoning variances for the Winters group. A special election was held to replace Mayor Barnes and the council members who resigned. Mason from the bakery, who had bravely spoken up from the start, was elected the new mayor. Mrs. Chin joined the city council, promising transparency and accountability. Northwest Books and Brews didn't just survive, it thrived. Customers from all over the Seattle area poured in, partly out of curiosity, partly to show support. I hired 3 more people, including Sean Patterson, who was now finding a chance to make amends for his mistakes. With David Chen's help, we painted a mural on the outside of the shop, a large oak tree, its roots deep in the earth, with tiny details in its canopy representing every facet of Oak Ridge, the school, the small businesses, the parks, and the people. Beneath the tree, the inscription, nourished by truth, strengthened by community. My son, Tyler, got a new fish tank, bigger and better, a gift from the community. He named the biggest goldfish Eleanor after Mrs. Thompson, who showed him that courage has nothing to do with size or age. Taylor went back to college a local hero and is now developing an app to help small towns track and publicize development decisions. She calls it Community Truth, a way to ensure what happened in Oak Ridge is less likely to happen elsewhere. 6 months after that fateful meeting, I expanded the bookstore into the building next door, not to create a retail empire, but to have more space for book clubs, poetry slams, and a small gallery for local artists like David Chin. On the opening night of the new space, as I looked around the room filled with familiar faces, friends, neighbors, and even the new school librarian who'd taken my old spot, I felt a sense of peace I never thought I'd find after 18 months of chaos. Mrs. Thompson, still going strong at 85, sat in a corner, reading Charlotte's Web to a group of children, including Tyler. Mason brought special cupcakes with tiny chocolate books on top. The Ramirez family had opened a small Mexican food counter in the cafe area. Mrs. Ramirez's chimichangas were now famous throughout King County. As I was taking in the scene, Taylor pulled me aside, her face beaming. Mom, the University of Washington wants to make our story a case study for business ethics and community empowerment. They want you to come speak. I hugged my daughter tightly. That's amazing. But I'm not the hero of this story. We all are, everyone in this room, everyone who dared to speak the truth. But you started it, Mom, Taylor said. You refused to back down when everyone else might have. I thought about that, about all the months of fear, self-doubt, and, sometimes, despair. About the sleepless nights wondering if I was putting my child in danger. About the loneliness of facing an enemy who outmatched me in money, power, and connections. You know, I said, what I learned from all this, it's that no matter how small you think you are, you always have the power to speak the truth. And when you do, when you really dare to, you'll be amazed at who stands up with you. I looked around the room again, at the community I now truly felt a part of. Truth has a strange power. I said, half to Taylor, half to myself. It can be buried, twisted, even denied. But like a persistent seed, it always finds its way to the light. I'll end my story tonight with an update. Margaret Winters was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Robert Winters received 5 years probation with 2,000 hours of community service. The Winters group was dissolved, its assets seized. They're $4. $5 million mansion has now been converted into a community arts center, an ironic twist considering Margaret once vehemently opposed any public cultural spaces. I used to wonder if I could forgive Margaret for everything she did. I'm still not sure, but I know one thing for certain. Oak Ridge is stronger, more united, and better because of what we went through together. As Mrs. Thompson once told me as we shared tea at the bookstore, sometimes it takes a storm to show us the strength of our roots. Oak Ridge went through its storm, And we discovered our roots were deeper and stronger than we ever knew. If you're facing a Margaret in your own life, someone using power to bully, intimidate, or deceive, remember that truth is always your most powerful weapon. Gather your evidence. Connect with those around you. Don't be afraid to stand up, even if your voice shakes. And remember that sometimes, the hero isn't the loudest person in the room or the one with the most power. Sometimes, it's just the person who dares to speak the truth when everyone else is silent.